Hello, everyone.
Hey, so Megan's eating, but she's leaving, right?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm good. Should we wait for Bryn?
It seemed like it was an open question whether or not he'd make it back in time.
I told you he'd be late. Okay.
So I don't mind waiting a few minutes, or we can start now, or silence.
I'm good. I'm just exhausted already.
This is really intense.
Yeah. Well, and it's got the added work of like keeping this going and trying to keep track of Twitter and the Google Doc. Whereas live, we just kind of got the video going and then we did the live thing. And I can tweet and talk at the same time, and I would just ignore the Google Docs. But since we're actually building things,
Yeah.
chatting, that's a little.
Plus video chat, plus Google Doc, plus video is. It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, she said undo. Oh, come on. And I did my toolbox. I accidentally clicked the X instead of click on it, and then it said it'll never show up again. And I clicked undo, and it didn't undo. There we go. Because people don't know me yet, I need my lower third. I'm missing my better half.
Hey, look, it's Bryn.
I'm walking. I'm not technically back. I'm going to mute my mic just while I'm walking.
All right. Well, it looks like we're pretty. Looks like we're pretty full up. So, and we should probably go ahead and get this party started.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I did an experiment with. Oh. We good?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry.
Okay. So I did an experiment this summer with an upper-level undergraduate course. This was a 300-level course. It was mostly juniors and seniors with a prereq that you had to have completed core theory. And the specific content and whatnot is not so much what I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to talk about more the larger general instructional design of I wanted to create a new kind of flip where instead of flipping the content or flipping what's happening in the classroom versus outside the classroom, I wanted to flip the roles between a teacher and a student. So essentially the way the class ran was I was the teacher for a good bulk of the beginning to get things going, and then gradually students did more and more and more, so that by the time the course was done, I was doing reading assignments like I was a student again, and the students who were in the class were running the show, and I was just showing up like a student. So because this is something new and something that I hadn't done before, and the fact that it was super scary, I thought this would be a good session where I could kind of break down how this was put together and how it went, and some of the pros and cons to doing this. I'll go ahead and put up kind of up here at the beginning that I feel like it went pretty well. Of course, the official student evaluation comments are locked down for me until September. So I won't have any of that here, but I can talk about some of the tools I used and some of the ways that I got students going from being more passive students into more active teacher roles. So on the Google Doc is a link to our course syllabus. It was a kind of seminar-style late 19th century analysis course. So there's a syllabus on there and the course website, and you can kind of get an idea from the website with the repertoire lists and kind of just looking through the blog posts, which kind of dealt with what we were doing from day to day. We got through a ton of material, and none of it was planned aside from about a week's worth ahead of time. So the way this was set up was tools focused, which a lot of this is going to go back to what we were talking about in the last session, where I introduced a bunch of tools. We did a one-day run of rhythm and meter with the text of music. We did a one-day run of PLR, intro, Neo-Riemannian stuff. We did a one-day let's remember forms that you learned in core. We did a one-day let's do chord to chord to chord, real harmonic analysis, kind of super zoomed in level. And then from there, it was structured so that students would be choosing their own articles that they would want everyone else to read. Students would be giving presentations on pieces that they wanted to present on. We would discuss articles, and then there would be kind of a group workshop analysis of a piece where all of us together would be working on the same piece at the same time. And what I really wanted to do was to eliminate what I'm sure many of us have felt of the gatekeeper feeling of, I have the score, I've done my own analysis, I have all of my own answers ahead of time, and now I'm going into class and waiting for the students to figure it out for themselves. So I wanted something that was going to be more active. One of the cons of this was that it was terrifying. Going into class with a piece by Scriabin, who's a composer I know very little about, and going, okay, well, today I'm going to spend an hour with this piece. I know nothing about it. I have listened to it once, which is scary. So the outcome of one of the other outcomes of this was that students were choosing articles from Spectrum, from MTO, from a variety of places, and one of the things that wasn't built into the course but had to be worked in was Schenkerian analysis, because every single article that they chose, they would come in the next day and go, okay, so I chose this, and I did like a quick skim before I picked it, and it seemed pretty good, but now I don't understand half of it because it's talking about all this stuff that I don't know. And it was a lot of the group working through, okay, this is what that means, or you know what, we don't really need to get into the Schenkerian analysis. We can take the larger points of the article instead, and trying to figure out how to deal with a lot of the research that's in our field and make it applicable to students who maybe aren't quite ready for a big Schenkerian analysis of Debussy's Afternoon of Prelude to the Afternoon of Fun. So that's definitely one of the cons, is that a lot of if you want to open it up and make research a component, how do you deal with the research in our field maybe not being super undergraduate student friendly? That is another thing that I thought would be good for discussion. This is really just going to be kind of free form. Feel free to start jumping in with some of these points. This is what I did this summer.
Well, I mean, one small comment. I think it's great just to, give the students permission to read things that will be a little beyond, to stretch them a little bit, that they won't fully understand. We don't always do that, right? So I think you just need to give them permission. I think it's the same thing in when you get students, or I get students to engage with primary sources, right? And I just say, here's a bunch of you know, whatever 19th century text, and we're just going to dive in. And you know, they can get a lot out of it, even though there'll be, you know, areas where they are kind of maybe a little overwhelmed. But just that initial permission, I think, is huge.
Yeah, one of the things that was built into the course, all of the grading was sort of SVG, kind of, not really. And this is all outlined in the syllabus if you want to take a quick look at it. But there were 10 objectives for the course. 5 of them were analytic tools, and 5 of them were research tools, or research presentation teaching tools. And each objective was pass, no pass. And however many passes you got dictated your grade. And I really wanted grades and grading and assessment to just be a non-entity as much as possible. And I think in order to do something like this, I think it was necessary. I don't know if something like this would work if, say, a student was, okay, well, but for this presentation I need to do this, this, and this, and if I don't get a B on it, you know, I really wanted to avoid that kind of assessment before activity thinking. So I just made everything pass, no pass, and that was just the way it was going to be. Which again gets into the stuff that we started talking about at the end of the last session, was assessment and kind of breaking from this mold. I mean, this class was super scary to teach, just because it was so unknown going into day 1 with a basic outline of what you were going to do for a week, and then giving students edit permissions on the Google Doc syllabus of, here, go to it. Change it. But I feel like it worked well, partially because it was a class of 6.
Yeah, small classes really help. Now, had you set up the pieces that you were going to go through ahead of time? You let them choose the pieces, the approach, and everything? Or how much structure did you actually provide beyond those first initial review topics?
The only repertoire I chose was repertoire from the outset as examples for the kind of the early stuff. So for like the early harmonic breakdown stuff was going to be Wagner, Tristan. The early form stuff, I wanted to do Mahler 1 because that was kind of a nice review, but got them into thinking about some 19th century stuff. As soon as all that introductory material was done, I did not choose any of the repertoire. It was a little hard for them to come up with a repertoire on day 1, which was the goal. So we spent quite a bit of time kind of gushing over favorite composers on that first day and coming up with a list of repertoire that there was in no way possible that we could cover. And what it ended up breaking down into was students would choose a piece of repertoire for their presentation that they would be responsible for presenting to everyone else. And then students would choose a piece of repertoire that would help guide them for choosing an article for us to read, and then that would be the piece or a similar piece that we would do in class together. And that's how the repertoire was decided. So it took a couple days, the first couple days of class, to really nail down the repertoire, and then after the initial 4, 5, 6 days of intro, we revisited it and got things down. Sometimes one of the students, it was maybe a week, less than a week before his presentation, said, you know, I was going to present on this, but I really think I've changed my mind. Is that okay? I'm like, sure, go for it. I didn't make any of these decisions. But then on the other hand, it was sometimes scary when we're all sitting there in a room with some piece that I don't know, that only one of them sort of knows, and it's you know, a bunch of awkward silence, and well, what do we do with this? And if I haven't looked at it ahead of time, I can't help them, you know, kind of, okay, well, how about if we look at this, or what are, let's look at this measure, or it means I don't have a starting point to jump start if things start to die.
One of the structures that I've found is helpful in situations like that is if you put, like when I teach grad classes and give someone a presentation topic, I have them, if they're going to treat a piece or an article, come up with like at least 5 questions for the class about that piece or that article, so that they have that starting point. Because oftentimes, like the good discussions are they just need a seed to get started. So then once that question is in the air, then they can sort of get some more traction into the piece about it.
That's how some of the days went. They'd read these super heavy Schenkerian articles on a piece, and then we get into class, and Schenkerian analysis was not one of the tools that we were going to use. In a 4-week summer class, it just wasn't realistic. So then it was, okay, well, this author approached it with Schenkerian analysis, and this is what they came up with. What tools do we have at our disposal that we could use instead? And then kind of compare. Though I think that was frustrating for students after 1 article, 2 articles, 3 articles, 4 articles. How many times is this going to be what we're doing? And so that was a little bit of a frustration for them of why is this everywhere? I don't understand. Like, is this even the best tool for this piece of, why does this article exist? I don't understand. So that was one of our classes devolved into okay, in order to understand these articles, here's a quick rundown of Schenker. And I had to do it totally on the fly, just because these were articles they were picking out. I wasn't choosing them, and they were choosing a lot of things that were they came up a lot. So one of the things that I was thinking of doing in this session, now that you guys kind of have an idea of how this class that I did was set up, was to discuss pros and cons and brainstorm on how, yes, this was very much set up like a graduate seminar, but for juniors and seniors, and to discuss how we can make a class and design a class so that we can get this teacher-to-student flip with our undergraduates. How soon should these things be done? What's the best course of action to put these things together? What happens when you have a class that is large and not just 6 people in a 4-week summer? This was very much an experiment, and I'd like to get some ideas going and maybe get a Google Doc of notes on some wider applications of this one idea.
It seems to me like that what you've done is effectively just a non single person independent study, like a multi-person independent study. Am I wrong? And like, I don't. Is there something that I missed that was maybe making it different from that?
I mean, essentially, it was sort of that, especially the whole. Here's a piece of music. We're all looking at it together for the first time. What do we do with it? So, is this something that could be done on a larger scale? Is this something that should be done on a larger scale? Is this something we should be doing with students before they're done with their core? These are all kinds of questions I have after running this experiment of a class.
So, Megan, I've done a similar kind of class in my computational analysis class last Maymester. It was 3 weeks, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and it was officially hybrid, but we met most days. How I kind of designed or kind of drew some limits that were a little more than what you had in order to make it a little bit more comfortable of an exploration on the students' part was we picked a very targeted topic where there weren't that many articles out there that were specific to what we were doing, and I knew them in advance. So we were looking at just doing first-order Markov analysis and cluster analysis on harmonic progressions in pop rock music from the Billboard data set. And so there's basically Ashley Burgoyne's dissertation and Trevor DeClercq and Davey Temperley's article, and those were the main ones that had actually done the kind of analysis we were doing. And so we did some prep for it in the first week, and then we got to it, and there wasn't a lot. There was a lot that they could do as next steps, some of which was suggested by those two things that we read, but there wasn't a lot else out there that actually engaged the kind of data we were looking at that they could draw on. So I had a good idea of a topic that we would hone in on, where there wouldn't be quite so many rabbit holes, which might be something that could help these kind of courses where they have a lot of freedom, but I've drawn a fence around the yard that they're playing in. You know, the sandbox is only so big. There's only so many toys in it. The other thing that really helped with that class, which I had to work really hard to sell to the curriculum committee, even though I think officially I didn't have to go through them, the dean wanted me to, because if they approved it and he approved it, and the associate dean approved it, and my department approved it, then if something went wrong, it wasn't my fault, and I wasn't hung out to dry. And so we went through the curriculum committee and had to convince some very traditional faculty there to allow the class to be both vertically integrated and interdisciplinary, which for me was really important for this. So we had master's level music students, master's level computer science students, and undergraduate computer science students. And this year, hopefully, we'll be able to do it with some undergrad music students. And that combination meant that we could split the class into teams where there was a grad student captain from each discipline on each team, which really helped the undergrads. It helped keep things oriented. They were people who knew a little bit more about what we were doing. That could help the others. So, for example, the computer scientists that didn't know what the Roman numerals meant, I made a couple videos for them to kind of introduce them to stuff. We talked through some stuff in class, did some basic practice. I played my guitar, I sang some Rebecca Black, and then they had a grad level music student on the team to make sure that that was okay. Same for the computation. I didn't have to teach anyone computation because if they didn't know it, the grad student knew it. And so we were really focused on the research. So we had an environment where there were enough experts throughout the room on some of these things that they became kind of like mini teachers in those areas. But of course, that experience for them, when it's an actual research project where they don't know the answers, they just know the skills, they're not like, oh, I'm taking a class but I'm not learning anything because I'm teaching. Like they're solidifying concepts because they're explaining them, but they're also they're learning new things about what they're researching because they're applying those tools in a new way. They're just coaching people on how to use the tools. And that also was a small class. We had 12 people. We met 5 days a week, and they weren't allowed to take any other classes. Some of them had jobs, but no other classes competing. I think those things, like these intensive, one-at-a-time courses, are really helpful for these where the social environment is really important to the class, and where you don't just like stop and do 10 other things before you come back to it again, but you have some time to sit with it, let it stew. So there's just some thoughts based on my experience that's related that maybe if we're coming up with if we're brainstorming ideas for how to make this kind of a course work, maybe some of those will help.
I was just talking on the back channel here about there has to be a certain thing that like brings people together, right?
Yeah.
For Megan, I guess it was music analysis in some general way, or I missed the first part of this. So what was it that this course was?
It was a late 19th century analysis course.
So 19th century music and analysis, and then sort of whatever they wanted to do beyond that was up to them. Is that right?
Well, you did say that you had, maybe you missed it, Brent. There were very broad competencies in analysis and research that were set out at the beginning as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, mine was similar. The assessment standards, we used contract grading so that the students had, I think, 4 big categories of things they needed to demonstrate some level of competency on, and they needed to prove to me before they started that final project push that they had an idea of what was appropriate for their degree level, for their major, for these 4 topics, but it could be differentiated within the class. But yeah, that idea there has to be something that holds the class together. It came up in my class when there was this when we were debating what is the project we're going to orient ourselves around. And it was very clear that we were dealing with computational analysis of symbolic data, dealing with form and/or harmony. That was the course description. That was the title of the course. That was the direction we're going. And I had an electrical engineer who really wanted to do digital signal processing and musical audio. And a couple other people were like, hey, yeah, that sounds cool. And then the musicians were like, hold on a second. This is not the course we signed up for. We know nothing about it. It's too late to drop. I paid the money. I've got to take the course, and that is not what I wanted to do. And as I told them, I'm not an expert in that area. I do not do digital signal processing. You're not going to get help from me. I can tell you if the chords are right or not when it's done with its analysis. And so that led to, and then the one who was really pushing that, she's like, this is my thesis that I want to work on. I really need to prepare for that. And I had emailed with her before the class and kind of let her know what the parameters were. But it was still, there was some conflict there that we had to work out, which I think was good to work that out. But that is something to watch out for with these kind of classes. If it's too openly defined, by the time you get through the preliminary work and then decide on what the big project or the repertoire is going to be, some students, it's too late for them to make a change, and it may not be at all what they wanted to take or what will help them with their future.
Right. I wonder what kind of, like, can you talk a little bit more, Chris or Megan, about like dealing with the administration on how to get this kind of a course approved, like, or how, what do you do if your department chair comes in and sort of sits down in your class and sees that you're not really, like, you haven't planned anything?
Well, I planned a lot.
I know you did.
But part of the deal, like, we
I'm playing devil's advocate here, so forgive me.
Yeah. So if you had looked at my plan before the course started, 1/3 of it was planned. And I was rolling out stuff as we went. I was making some changes based on where we were headed. But part of the deal of getting it approved, there's like 3 curriculum committee meetings. I had all kinds of questions that I had to come back with answers to as we went. The big thing is the associate dean that was in charge of the summer session was on my side. He thought what I wanted to do was really good. He gave me some tips on the kinds of things the curriculum committee is going to want to see to make sure that it's okay. And he let me know how much of that then after they approved it could be changed. But then the big sticking point actually was the highest level of approval, where the interim dean for the year, who's now is normally an associate dean here, was really concerned that the content not get lost in the research. And that was something where he and I had some disagreement as to, like, the content of the course can be the research. It can be the research skills and the process that is the ultimate thing that they're learning. But he really wanted to make sure that there was a strong set of content, that wasn't going to get lost and it wasn't going to be too fluffy. And so he basically gave the thumbs up with the provision that I had to write up some reflections at the end before it was offered again, and that 2 of the associate deans had to sit in on the class. And so I had 2 associate deans observe me during that class. One of those classes was we sat outside and discussed some Leonard Meyer and some Michel Foucault, essentially asking what is data. and then the other one we were actually doing some work, and so there were a lot of things to go through. I mean, basically I started proposing that course right when I got here, maybe even before I got here. And it got approved officially finally by the dean like 2 months after students started signing up for courses in the College of Music. So since we're a small college, we didn't have as many music people as I anticipated because it got finally approved so late. Whereas computer science, basically 2 emails and a recommendation from someone I know in the department to the chair, and boom, it was good. And so that can just depend on who your administrators are, what committees you have to go through. I'm glad I went through all that, because then if something did go wrong, I could say, oh, this committee met with me 3 times and grilled me and asked me about that specific question, and they said yes. And then the dean said yes. And then 2 deans observed and said, yeah, this is going well. So that it was actually good to have that protection in spite of the fact that it was a lot of work to go through. But now I can offer the course again. It's just a matter of, does it fit in the schedule, and do we get enough students to sign up for it, because it's gone through all that. So.
proposing my course was a similar setup, though I had the additional hurdle that I'm a graduate student and not on the faculty. So I had to go through many hoops to ensure that both the faculty in my department and the faculty in the School of Music and the administration were okay with a course like this happening. Thankfully, we have a very nice program set up here where graduate students can propose a summer course, and then the theory faculty choose the course or the courses depending on enrollment predictions that are going to then be offered, since this is covering an undergraduate requirement for their degree program. So I basically sent in the proposal, I sent in the syllabus, which was very much a blank slate, and then I sent in a separate proposal saying this is why the syllabus is a blank slate, here's how this is going to happen, here's what hack the syllabus means, here's why I feel it's important to have a living document as a syllabus instead of a piece of paper. And I tried to just make the case for why this was a good idea. I think there was, even like going into the class, I think there was still kind of a, well, I mean, it's going to happen, it's going to be what it's going to be. But I had a lot of support from the theory department here to let this go through and let it be whatever it was going to be, and whatever it was going to be okay. Unfortunately, we didn't get the enrollment that we had hoped. Usually for a summer class like this, we need 10 in order for it to make. But because our graduate teaching fellows are unionized, and we just went through a very rough year of bargaining, due to some changes this past year, it basically, I contacted the admins before my class ran and was like, I don't have the 10 that I need. They're like, well, you know what, we have to let it run anyway. So that's pretty much what it came down to on the administrative side, was it didn't have enrollment, but they had to let it go through because of my union. And unfortunately, that's just how it went for a lot of the summer classes here. We just didn't have high enrollments. But as far as the course put together, the assessment, the department level approved the assessment policies and the syllabus design and the syllabus plan, and then the department helped me as a graduate student kind of pitch it to the admin and get their approval for it.
I wonder if we can kind of, I'm kind of playing the devil's advocate for this session for some reason, but if we can kind of turn it around a little bit, and I can ask either you and Chris, or if anyone else wants to jump in on this question, like what are the benefits over a traditional, like let's leave flipped pedagogy out of it for a second, like you're talking about an entirely flipped student-teacher role. Like why would you want to do it this way as opposed to, you know, I mean, I guess it depends on what your goal is, right? I don't know. I can imagine skeptics sort of saying, well, how are you supposed to get what you're supposed to get done if you did it this way? So why would you want to do it this way as opposed to the sort of traditional student-teacher role in a classroom? What would be the benefit? I mean, that might be pretty obvious to everybody, but I don't know.
Well, my answer to that has always been that the content is not the center of that kind of a course, that the ultimate goal for the students is not mastery of a set of prescripted content objectives, but that the goal for the course is for them to develop their ability to ask good questions, identify questions that are answerable given the resources they have, identify the resources they have that are relevant for the question, make a plan for answering the question, seek an answer to the question, and if you don't find one, figure out why or what needs to change to go ahead. Like, these are all things that are actually far more important in the long run for them to have than the content knowledge that we could have in the course. Now, there will be content to the course because you need the content in order to ask questions. You need to know what questions have already been answered. And so, you know, and the thing is that there are a lot of people who say that don't have an understanding of what kind of machinery could actually be, or what kind of design, let's not say machinery, what kind of design could be put together that will help students achieve that. And so that's where then you have to come in with some good learning theory, you've got to come in with some concrete examples, and often, even if it's not a lesson you end up doing, say, okay, so let's say we're asking this question. Here are the things that I would have them read. Here are the places I would have them go to look to see what else they might read. Here are the skills I would expect the computer science people to bring, the music people to bring, and the kind of tasks they would put them together on. And so it may not be what we end up doing, but say this is what it would look like if, you know, X, Y, and Z variables have these values in this context.
I mean, this idea of flipping the teacher-student relationship, I mean, is kind of, there's all these kind of different gradations here, right? You kind of have more seminar-style or project-style classes. You know, you could, I mean, we're all having this discussion about something that we care about together, and I'm learning a lot from it, and presumably, hopefully, we're all, you know, this is kind of a more of a flat, you know, non-hierarchical or less hierarchical situation, right? You could say this is what we want to aim for in our class, where no one is the leader and it's just purely democratic, and that's, I think, a different thing from flipping the teacher, from putting the student in the teacher role. And I think the key thing with your class, Megan, is that the students are choosing material that then the other students have to engage with. That the students are actually assigning things to each other and to you. I think that's, but I think you could even, I mean, if you want to kind of push this further, you could even, you know, have the students actually, you know, creating not only questions, but say assignments to go with them, and kind of bringing in the baggage of that more traditional teacher role, or the responsibilities of the teacher role. You know, even, you know, as that teacher role and grading the things, I think, you know, this would even kind of further that flip and take it away from something where we're just kind of going for a kind of discussion group or reading group style or research team style core. I mean, I think there are values in all of these, right? I think one of the interesting things looking at your syllabus as well is how, I think this is a totally key and absolutely great way to do it, is that you gave the first presentation, right? And so even if you're not explicitly like saying like, here's how you should do your thing, you're just modeling it, right? And so I'm curious to what extent did the students' presentations build on that model, or build on the kind of teaching techniques that you used during the review sessions? And to what extent did they do something different? And, you know, to what extent did they understand this kind of stepping into the teacher role, stepping into the teacher position as a kind of move? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think part of the move was helped just because of day one getting that kind of edit permission on a syllabus, and the idea that I can declare what I want to do, and I'm going to be able to do it. And here it is, I've made the edit, and giving them that agency to be able to say that and not be, well, if there's time, or, you know, have a bunch of requirements pushed on top of it of, well, you can do that, but you have to do this, 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 and this. So I was very clear in the outset, because of the way this was set up, of we're going to have kind of some demo classes, and then you guys are going to be doing this. So I tried to make that clear from day one with the whole syllabus edit, and trying to help guide them into content-wise what they wanted to pick. Once they started doing the presentations, it was really clear, and kind of what they took from the course. Most students focused in on one or two of those analytic competencies, the ones that they liked or they felt were most applicable to the pieces that they had chosen, and then they ran with it. So not all presentations covered all competencies, nor was that, you know, the idea. but someone would give a presentation on, someone did a presentation on Verclair Tenant, and they spent a huge amount of time on, you know, here's the poem that this is based on, here's how this connects, and then the end of their presentation, which is something that I had never done in class before, was, okay, you have the poem with the translation in front of you. I'm going to randomly pick a spot in the music, play, and you tell me where it is in the poem, and then they discuss. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and at this point, I was a student as much as everybody else in the class, besides the presenter. I had no idea the student was going to do that. I had no idea. And then all of a sudden, it just turned into, you know, I'm sitting there doing this activity with the students, and it no longer matters that my name is the one next to their grade on the transcript. I'm just another person in this experience at the same time. And that just happened to be the first of the student presentations after mine. Mm-hmm. So then things just kind of snowballed, and people really did just do in their presentations what they wanted. Some were really just traditional, you know, here I'm going to squeegee up on the boards the, you know, form, or this is kind of model out stuff as they talked. Some brought in like really well done, pre-done PowerPoints that modeled the one that I had shown. It's just everybody kind of did their own thing, so it was all very personal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that it can be really great to let the students do things their own ways. I mean, I think it's great that the student, you know, this initial student who did the Verclair Tenant thing was kind of designing an activity for you guys and engaging you instead of just presenting. But I wonder whether we could even get away from the word presentation, which to me, like, I don't know what alternative word I would use if I were setting this up, but I feel like maybe there's probably a better word that gets at the, you know, just that they're curating, that they're, you know, Phil says like, exactly, right? You know, these kinds of things, you know, do a facilitation on a piece of, I don't know if that gets kind of laughable, but, you know, I'm just interesting, you know, whether when you flip this, you kind of end up reproducing like lecture style classes, except you're just not the one lecturing, right? I think that's again, maybe I'm kind of doing devil's advocate here, but like that could be the danger, right?
Right. Yeah, I think most everyone's presentation had some level of interaction, and that was definitely not something that I had planned or told them to do. I think that just came from the way that most of the presentations of material prior had been very hands-on. So again, I don't know if it was just from I'm going to do what came before me, and this is what kinds of things we did, so I guess I'll do the same kinds of things. So I'm not sure if that's where that came from. Yeah. One of the kind of as far as like facilitator or curator, the primary word that inspired the way that this class was put together was, instead of me being a teacher, I wanted to be an expert companion. You know, I want to be in this class, I want to go through this and experience this for the first time with you. I just have more background in this to help.
That's a really important point, Megan, and I think that the skeptic devil's advocate might ask, you know, well, if we're just letting the students kind of run the course themselves, like, why are we even here? Like, do we need our own expert? Like, why instead of getting a PhD in music theory to teach these classes, why don't we just get somebody who's really good at facilitating this kind of environment, right? And so, like, the question of expertise is really, really important, and I wonder if some people are going to say, well, like, the reason that we hired you is because we want students to like tap into what you know, like, you know, and it's like, can you imagine? You know, like I'm James Hepikowski. Like we're talking about sonata theory. I'm sorry. Like that's why I was hired. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, to some extent, I think that's always going to be the case, isn't it? You know, and if we sort of just say like, well, students can do whatever they want, you know, then again, like why do we even exist? And maybe we don't need to exist. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like Caitlin wants to.
Oh well, I'm having an idea that I've never been able to move on that seems to me kind of pertained to this kind of structure, and I was wondering if anybody had the opportunity to do this. And it's basically a performers analysis course to where, since most of especially our undergrad students are performers of some kind, are working on music to perform, that they bring in whatever piece they're working on that semester and do analysis, historical, contextual, theoretical analysis as a means of informing how they're going to perform the piece, and then the class would culminate in a kind of joint performance / discussion of each of their pieces, or somehow. I don't know, I haven't thought through it more than that, but I was wondering if anybody's been able to do something along those lines, or whatnot.
I think Daphne Leon, one of my colleagues here, who's going to be at the in-person conference next week, has done some things like that with performance and analysis. I mean, it's an area where she's an expert in, but she really tries to bring those two sides together in a similar way. I mean, what I was going to say before, which kind of relates to that, is that when you have the instructor when you have an instructor and students, no matter how much that instructor tries to come down, the instructor is the one grading, the instructor is the one with the degree, and there's only so much of the hierarchy you can undo. But if you find ways to have students fill in the roles in between, so Caitlin, this might have to do with kind of what you're saying about bringing them in to kind of pull those parts together collaboratively, where the instructors, if I'm understanding you right, they're a little more kind of like a chamber coach than they are like an instructor, or in like a vertically integrated system where you've got, you know, instructor, graduate students, undergraduates, and then maybe they have like a horizontal, like we're from different disciplines, so we're on the same level, but I'm an expert in this thing and you're an expert in that thing, so they get the experience flipping those roles with each other. That can often be a really helpful way to do it, so we're not being dishonest about or disingenuous about our role as an authority figure. And it's a way to not necessarily abdicate the authority role that some students really kind of need or feel more comfortable with, but you're still giving them a position where they can take on some agency and some authority and actually be the expert. Because that's the thing, if we pretend we're not the expert, there will always be, and I got this last semester in some of my evaluations, like, you have so much more information that you're just not giving us because you're not lecturing. You're making us do all the stuff. Now, I'm doing a lot of work designing the experience that helps them come to that understanding, but then they'll come to my office and sit down and we'll talk for 20 minutes and I'll tell them some crazy stuff. Like, see, I want more of this in class. I'm like, oh, okay, you know, and so maybe there's ways to work that in. But, you know, on the other hand, like they need situations where they're not just the pretend expert, where I'm holding back what I have to help them do stuff, which I think is valuable. But they need a situation where they actually are the expert, kind of like a Montessori class, the older kids in the class that are actually the ones teaching the younger kids, and both are learning through that process. And the instructor is stepping back to observe, to kind of design and direct gently who should be working with whom and where they should be going, what they should be doing next, and kind of taking that time to observe, but putting them in a role where they're actual experts for a while, which I think is really helpful.
That definitely came up in some of our article discussions in our class. We would start discussing this article that I had read with them, that somebody, you know, one of the students had assigned, and then someone would look over and go, I really didn't understand this part, or I didn't understand this vocabulary, and they would all look to me to, you know, can you define this? Can you help us understand this? And then sometimes that situation would come up and another student would say, oh, no, I got it. And it was those times that I would have to step back enough that if someone wanted to step up, they could. But if everyone was like really drowning, I could just come in and be like, okay, like this is how this works. But I think they appreciated being able to at least have the opportunity to figure it out on their own before having to come to me. But they always knew they could come to me. I mean, these articles, you know, I had control of the website, so in order for their assignment to be sent out, they had to go through me. So there was still that somewhat of a hierarchy of, yeah, I'm still a teacher, even though I'm not lecturing in class.
Well, and part of the issue is if you're asking a question that doesn't have a set answer yet, then, but you're still an expert in the kind of things that you use to answer that question, then you can be totally genuine about your position as an expert and as an authority without saying, haha, I'm just holding the answer back until you find it. And if you don't, I'll fill it in, because then they're like, well, eventually if I don't do it, they'll give it to us. And so that's what was really nice about my class, is like I was an expert in music theory, and I knew something about coding, but I knew that the master's students in particular knew stuff that I didn't know. I didn't know how my knowledge of statistics would relate to theirs. And it turned out I was a little more of an expert than they were than I thought I was going to be. But the question we were asking, I knew that the answers floating around out there were not satisfactory, but I didn't know what the actual answer was. And so, like, that meant that, okay, so I'm pursuing the answer to this question with you, but it's not because I'm an idiot and didn't do my prep work. It's because it hasn't been answered yet, and I know how to do it, and you know how to do some aspects of it, and we can pull those together and answer it. And I know how to lead the process. I know how to lead a team. I know how to coordinate and design these experiences and working relationships. I just don't know the answer, but that doesn't mean we won't get there. It doesn't mean I don't know how to get it. And I think finding places where we're not just holding back what we have, which some students will kind of bristle at, but we're giving a question that we know how to pursue an answer to but hasn't been answered yet, puts us in a more genuine position of leader and expert, but also not knowledge withholder.
Right, and authority figure and that sort of thing.
Right. The Mary Stewart article I shared, and Neil was mentioning some of this on Twitter, she's got a really good nuanced approach of the way that an instructor should be an authority in a class. The article is on designing for emergence. So not just giving students freedom and hoping emergent learning happens, and not saying this is the learning you will have, but finding a way to design for epiphanies in a sense. And she's got some good thoughts there. I keep coming back to it a lot, especially for my online classes. But her first thing is like the instructor should be an authority figure, but and it's a good kind of discussion on that. So it's definitely worth checking out. I've linked to that probably 10 times this week between my class on the flipped class right now and this conference and other conversations. So it's good stuff.
If I can share a somewhat of a negative anecdote about this whole thing, Jonathan can hopefully refrain from laughing a little bit about this because I think he knows who I'm talking about. But
I think I already know who you're talking about.
Exactly. So when I was an undergrad, I was in the jazz band, and for whatever reason, our jazz band director decided that year that we weren't going to have a big band, and that instead what we were going to do is just break up into this, small jazz combos and just do whatever the hell we wanted every rehearsal. And so he would just literally come in and sit down and be like, what do you guys want to do today? I don't know, you want to play some tunes or what? And that was and in a way we learned a lot that semester, in that we kind of we made these small ensembles and we wrote a lot of music and we performed a lot and learned a lot, and perhaps that was his grand scheme, but I can't help but laugh at the fact that 15 years later we're still laughing at this guy being kind of an idiot and lazy, and I think my point is that in all of this we just really have to remember that some students are looking at you to be some kind of leader, whether that's the sole. I don't think that has to be the sole source of information and the be-all end-all authority figure. And like Chris says, if you can ask questions that you don't know the answer to and show them an honest process for getting there, you can kind of display some of that leadership. But that we can't forget that that we are kind of looking for that leader. Our students are, and I mean that's part of why some people come to university. You know, they want to be inspired by that that person, and I don't know. I think back on that experience a lot, and it was really, really great. But it was also kind of, you know, pretty obvious that he just was like kind of putting his middle finger up at the institution, maybe because he wasn't getting paid well as an adjunct or something like that, and he just sort of said, well, I'm not going to put in any effort to this. You guys do whatever you want.
Bryn, you bring up an instance where you say that, you know, that instructor may have been kind of putting up his middle finger at the institution, and I totally get that. I mean, he very well may have been. You obviously received that impression yourself.
I'm almost positive that's exactly what he was doing. But.
Right. Whereas I think, in other words, his tone, his demeanor, his intention was that it was negative. Whereas if your intentionality as an instructor is clearly out of concern and care for the students and their educational experience, I think it has the opportunity to just transform into something completely different than this negative experience that you described. And so, you know, coming in and saying, well, I don't know, let's just do whatever, is different than coming in and saying, all right, I'm here as a resource, I'm here to help, I've done this before, but this is your class.
Yeah.
Let's do this for you. And that's a totally different approach.
Yeah. When you're coming with content to teach them, you're coming with something to impart. It's just that isn't, you know, specific facts about specific pieces of music or styles. It's an analytical approach, or it's a compositional approach, it's a research approach, it's a way to do it, and you're showing them how to do it. And I think we can also come in with some learning psychology, maybe on the syllabus, or I took advantage of my online course in cognition being a psych class instead of a music class to give them a little bit of the psychological explanation behind some of the pedagogical choices that I had made. And so, like, things like if knowledge is constructed by individuals, not received. You know, we could talk about the banking model and Paulo Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed and all the politics that go into that, but if we could just talk about, like, this is how the brain works. You construct knowledge, and you construct it by perceiving things, but by doing things, but always relating that to what's always in your memory, and it works in a certain way. And so there's certain kinds of experiences that are helpful for that, and other experiences that aren't. And the point is to get it into your long-term memory with lots of associations with other things, not to get it into your notebook. And if we can explain some of these things and how the decision relates to that, I think that can help as well. But ultimately, and I just tweeted this, I think the more I think about it, the more a good chamber music coach is the model here. Like the ensemble may pick the repertoire, they may set the rehearsal schedules, they may choose when and where they're going to perform. But the chamber music coach is always going to be that expert, sensitive musician who's going to come help get the best out of you. But they can't do it for you. And honestly, my best chamber music coach was for our horn quartet, 4 horn players. He was the saxophone professor, because that year the horn professor was on sabbatical, and we had one person fill in for lessons, but he couldn't do all the chamber coaching. And so we had the saxophone professor who had coached a lot of sax quartets to some really great performances. And you all know the rivalry between horns and sax players, but he was just a really, really sensitive musician. He had a great ear, and I think the fact that he could hear something that wasn't right, could also hear what it should sound like, and could communicate that musically, but left it to us to figure out the technique that went into it. And so we had to work on that on our own and with each other. I think that actually ended up building our musicianship more strongly than if someone said, oh, you got to do this with your embouchure, you got to push your lower teeth out a little bit, you got to switch mouthpieces, try this fingering. Because then we're just like, okay, he said to do this, and oh yeah, that works better, so I'll remember to do that. But you've not applied it. Whereas if it's, oh, okay, so this person's lagging behind this person, but it's only when this rhythm is happening. So what can you all do to, because we can't move while we play the same way that a saxophonist would, and we're facing in ways we're not looking at each other. We're sitting in a box all pointing the same direction, so only the people in front can't see the people in back. So how do we communicate? That's something different than he's used to. And so those kind of, here's the problem, and here's the goal. how do you and what you know, how can you use what you know to fix that problem, and I'll let you know if you're getting there or not. And I thought that was actually a really good experience there, and that's something that I think as theorists teaching theory, but to people who aren't theorists, or historians or composers teaching these things to people that aren't in that discipline but can make use of it. I think that's a good model to keep in mind. We are, yeah, just to say, Megan, we're running out of time here. If the next one is going to start at 4 Eastern. Can
we say like 4:10 Eastern? And just maybe I don't mind cutting tech tools short. I never mind that.
What do y'all think?
Just like 4:10 till 5.
Sure. What is the last session?
Yeah, that's fine.
Tech tools.
Tech tools. Okay.
So we'll bump it by 10 minutes, and then.
Okay.
No, sorry, Phil.
No. Okay.
That's some military clock.
Thanks, everybody, for a good discussion and for bearing with my rough start to this session.
No.
Thanks for kicking us off.
Thanks, Megan.
See ya.
All right, guys. Talk to you soon.
See you soon.